SB 1860 by Hughes relating to the adoption of a climate policy and a municipal charter.
The chair recognizes Representative Craddick to explain the bill.
Mr. Speaker, members, this bill allows for legislative oversight to assess the need for a climate charter in any city or local government and adopt a resolution recommending the charter. In any existing charter would still have the right to do this, and it would provide consistency for cities across the state.
Mr. Speaker.
Representative Goodwin, for what purpose?
Will the gentleman yield for some questions?
The gentleman yield for questions.
Yes, ma'am.
The gentleman yields.
Thank you. So I noticed in the background and purpose, it talks about the city of El Paso, and it mentions that its climate charter that would require 80% of the energy within the city to be green energy would then lead to an increase in utility costs for its citizens. How do you know that that would lead to increased energy costs?
They had a study done. In fact, actually, that election was not last Saturday, I think the Saturday before in El Paso, and it only got 20% of the vote.
So, I'm sorry, you said that the city of El Paso had a vote on their climate charter?
Yes, they did. Yes, ma'am.
And it didn't pass, it sounds like.
Got defeated, and they only got 20%.
So it passed or did not pass?
Did not pass.
Did not pass, okay. And so if it didn't pass, the citizens of that community made that decision.
That's correct. That's correct.
And so why the need for this legislation that I believe could affect other cities? Is that correct?
That's correct. But the reason is that you're going to have a hodgepodge across the state when you've got industries looking and companies moving into the state and stuff like that. You're going to have this no oversight, and you're going to have a hodgepodge in different cities across the state, and this makes it uniform. It doesn't deny anybody the right to vote and do what they want to do in the individual cities.
You know, I feel like we keep having this argument about the hodgepodge of regulations around the state, but that's because cities are so very different around the state. In fact, counties are very different around the state, and we're trying to make everything one size fits all and say the state has to decide everything. But that's the whole point in home rule cities, is that they get to make their rules. And this session, we just keep saying, nope, you can't make that rule. Nope, you can't make that rule. Right here, we're saying that a city can't make the determination to have a climate charter to try to...
No, they can. They can make that decision, and they can make that proposal. We're just setting up a basis for them to do it where the legislature just has to approve it so it's consistent statewide. And we've done this for years. We've done this, and it's worked great for companies and businesses and stuff like that. And I mean, just you brought the facts up of El Paso, and you look at what happened down there and what the percentages were on how it would affect their business and their employment. And then that's what we're trying to do, is help that from happening to other cities. I don't care what Midland does or anybody else. They can do it, and they can have an election, and that takes care of it.
Well, again, they put it up for an election. Isn't that the way to do it, so that you're sure you're doing what your community wants, as opposed to saying that we have to get approval from the state? I mean, I know the state doesn't like to have to get approval from the federal government, but now you're saying cities have to get approval from the state.
They just have to get approval that we have one basis to do it. You've still got the cities to take the vote, but we're all going to coincide together, and that's all this is.
So do you think that the state will give approval for a climate charter?
I have no idea.
Thank you.
Mr. Speaker,
Dr. Gonzalez, for what purpose?
does the gentleman yield?
Does the gentleman yield for questions?
Yes, ma'am.
The
I'll
gentleman
be glad
yields.
to yield.
Thank you. Speaker Craddick, I just have a question. Logistically, I think we could look at El Paso as a wonderful case study. Even though our climate charter did not pass, it demonstrated that you can put these things on the ballot and the local communities can really decide if it's positive or negative without maybe state interference in this conversation.
Mary, let me just say this. I think what you're saying is right. But there again, we have a large state and you've got multiple cities and a lot of businesses have a business in El Paso, maybe one in Dallas, one in Midland, my district, whatever. And if you don't have some type of coordination, you're going to have a problem. And I mean, your situation kind of proved the situation in El Paso. You only got 20% of the vote. And I don't even know what your numbers, what you propose are. That doesn't have anything to do, but I think we need a coincide agreement on what we're doing here. And that's all this does. It just says you come back to the legislature, and if the legislature says X is what we're doing statewide, then you can go back to your city and you can either vote yes or no, and the city makes that determination.
And I understand what you're trying to do. I just think it's really important for us not to undermine local efforts or democratic engagement in our local communities. And obviously there's lots of people who do care about developing public policies or that do impact climate. And so how do we find that balance between saying a local community, and we want to support local political engagement on any topic, and they should be able to develop their own policies, and recognizing when it's a policy that people don't like in El Paso, it doesn't pass.
Right, well, but they are going to be able to do that. So you're arguing for my bill. They are going to be able to do that, and they're going to have the right to do what they want to do. We're just going to set up a statewide goal that all the cities are going to do, and that's it.
But what if a local community has different ideas and don't fall within the parameters? I think I don't disagree with your premise. I also just want to make space for local community and political engagement, specifically in a topic that a lot of people are caring about. And I think what I'm trying to point out is your points, in some ways, what happened in El Paso is a good indicator of when people don't like local policy, they just don't pass it. And I think we should encourage that. I just think the El Paso context just kind of demonstrates an interesting dynamic for us to consider. Thank you.
Representative Bernal, for what purpose?
Gentleman yield for a quick question.
Gentleman yield for questions?
I'll yield.
Gentleman yields.
I came to get clarification because I think that there's some confusion as to what your bill does. So let me just ask in very small pieces. The first is the term climate charter means some sort of voted on citywide or region-wide effort that would have some sort of environmental regulation for just that jurisdiction. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. And some people are saying that what your bill does is make climate charters illegal, that you couldn't do them at all, but you're saying that that's not the case. Is that right?
That's not the case. That's correct.
And so there's an intermediary step that a municipality would take in order to pass or have a climate charter. Is that right? That's what the bill does?
I'm sorry. I couldn't hear you.
What your bill does is add a step that a city would have to follow before they have that election. Is that right?
That's correct.
And what exactly is that step?
And there's a date in there that we've got an amendment coming up that changes that date to extend it. Okay.
And so one of the arguments that you have for the climate charter is that this idea of a hodgepodge or a checkerboard of different regulations around the state that would be, I guess, confusing to industry that would have presence in different places. Is that right?
That's correct.
So here's my question. Would you agree or disagree that different parts of the state have different quality of air? In other words, the air quality in Dallas might be different than the air quality in El Paso and might be different than the air quality in San Antonio.
I think that's right. But you come before the legislature and you're gonna ask whatever is done during that legislative session on what you can go back to the people with. And so I think that'll all work itself out.
And so if, for example, San Antonio has really, really bad air quality, especially during the summer, you're saying that the Bexar County delegation would have to come here and make the case about the air quality in San Antonio to the legislature, and then the legislature would give the delegation the permission
right to have the election. That's correct.
to have an election.
That's
and you're
right.
saying that is the way that that municipalities would have to deal with air quality, is to wait every other year to address it, pending the judgment of the entire body. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. But listen, the whole idea is to set it up where we've got some type of a state congenial type thing. And look, if you're a business and you're moving into the state and you've got 10 offices in the state, or 5 or 2 or whatever, and you don't know what you're doing in one area of the state and doing the other. We've got this in a lot of bills that have been done in a lot of programs throughout the state, right? And it works out. This just makes sure we're going to have a congenial across-the-board theory. That's it.
But just to be clear, I hear that, I understand it, the theory makes sense to me, but just to be clear, if there's really bad air quality in San Antonio, and I wanted to do something about it locally, I would have to come to this body and ask non-San Antonians to vote as to whether or not I could present the option to San Antonio residents about voting on measures that would affect the air quality in San Antonio.
That's the way the bill reads. That's correct.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Speaker,
Yes, ma'am.
will the representative yield for a few more questions?
Representative Ortega, for what purpose?
Will the representative yield for a few
Does the
more
gentleman
questions?
yield for questions?
I'll be glad to
Gentleman
yield.
yields.
You just brought up El Paso, and actually we just had that election this past weekend on Saturday, and just as you mentioned, we actually had a very good turnout for the election, but the Proposition K that dealt with the climate charter failed, like you said. You are aware of that.
Yes, ma'am, I am.
And I think that one of the things that was extremely controversial about the Proposition K was the fact that they wanted the city to take over the El Paso Electric Company, but the electric company had just been purchased a few years ago. And they
I don't know anything about your amendment and what y'all did. I just know that you had the election.
Okay, well, I was just kind of clearing that up because I think that that's one of probably the biggest reason that Prop K failed in our community. Would your bill actually prohibit, for instance, if in the future El Paso decides to put up another climate charter proposal, would it be prohibited without getting permission from the state?
It would through the year, it'll be expanded here in a minute with an amendment. It will, according to this bill, the way it's laid out, is to be approved by January 2025 and to be voted on before 2026. But Ms. Weiner has got an amendment that's going to extend that, so you could do that without y'all having to come to the legislature. That's right.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I think there's an amendment.
Please excuse Representative Herrero because of important business on the motion by Representative Martinez-Fisher. Is there objection? Luke. Chair hears none.